What's going on, everyone? Coming off of the heels of the first Ix, we are taking a look at the sequel to see if it holds up just as well as the prequel. And I have to say that right now, this has got to be the most conflicting entry I have played in quite some time, even more conflicting than Gunvolt 3. When I talked about the third mainline entry, I knew from the jump how I felt about the game even before I began to put my thoughts on the paper. Ix2 on the other hand was something I needed to approach a little differently because it certainly didn't retain the same playstyle Copen had in both Gunvolt 2 and the first Ix. Then when I experienced it for the first time, I remembered not liking this game too much and ended up leaving it on the shelf forever after I had finished it. So when I replayed the game for this particular video, I cleansed myself of all the prior knowledge I had and went through it with a clean slate to see if Ix2 ended up being a diamond in the rough that was misunderstood, or if my initial impressions I had when I experienced it for the first time is still justified and remained the same. But before I take a deeper dive into this game, I want to mention a few things. Back in my previous video with Ix, I mentioned that both games did not feature a mission briefing in the stage select screen along with mugshots of the main bosses. Well, I was halfway correct. As one of you lovely commenters pointed out, there is a mission briefing that you can select right after you choose which stage you want to visit. It's slightly easy to miss when you're just trying to get the ball rolling, but the briefing is still there if you want to check it out. Don't expect to see any of that in Ix2 though. The moment you select any of these missions, it's go time. Interestingly, they did bring back the mugshots, but for the challenges. Why they are reserved only for the challenges instead of the main stages is a bit of an odd choice, but not nearly as odd as all of the decision making I'm going to cover. Anyway, I'm about to spoil this game from head to toe, so I'd suggest you come back later if you don't want me to spill any of the beans regarding the plot. Other than that, I'm glad to have you around. Now roll that spoiler bump for me. Normally this is where I would go into an in-depth story synopsis, but I'm going to forego that. The main story in this game has nothing to do with Copen's world, and it doesn't feel like a direct follow-up even though it actually is. Somehow everything was resolved after the first game despite Sumeragi losing its main leader as well as its elite squad that kept everyone in check after they tried to commit a mass genocide against the Minnows. You really can't expect me to believe that the Adepts and the Minnows got together just to sing Kumbaya and call it a day. I also had to say Copen's world because in Ix2, he, Lola, and Kohaku gets isekai'd into a world that's being maintained by robots and no humans in sight. Now this is not a bad story by any means, it's serviceable for what the game is. I felt that Null as a character is a great addition to the team as she is the sweetest of beings, and the whole concept behind a version of Copen who is desperate for help and a Lola who has gone insane was quite interesting. Shoot, during her final boss fight, you actually hear a remix version of the Igniter theme, which would explain why you had a different anthem playing when you're resurrected. Not to mention, under a certain rule set, this boss fight is quite difficult. Still not as hard as the first Gunvolt as just playing the normal mode goes, but it is still difficult enough to run your fade a few times, again, if you decide to follow certain rules. But really, the story can be summed up as this. Copen and company getting isekai'd, climbing to the top of Jacob's tower from Megaman X8 and using the mother computer to send them back home, finding out the mother computer is corrupted, needs Kohaku in order to enact her plans because she's human. Kohaku gets kidnapped by mother computer's biggest fan named Ypsilon. He destroys that teleporter leading up to mother, but the best girl comes in, sacrifices herself, and merges her conscience with the entire pillar so you may now continue your climb. Also, you are treated to this gruesome scene during your mission select for the rest of the game. Then it's here you can go for the 3 endings. For the sake of time, I'm just going to tell you the one that really matters. When the right conditions are met, you can knock some sense into Ypsilon, who is sporting blue for some reason, and he's not exactly the same Ypsilon you fought up to this point. He transfers the teleporter data over to Copen's razor wheel, then restores Null back to her normal self. You knock some sense into Mother, rescue Kohaku, and then all 4 of you go home together. In case you're curious as to what those other 2 endings are, the regular ending basically involves you leaving just like you did in the best ending, except Null stays behind.
Thank you, everyone. Take care.
And meanwhile, the bad ending only happens if you continue to show Yukin Kohaku to the point where her body can't register damage. Then, when you go ahead and rescue her, you leave the whole world behind just like you did in the normal ending, but now you're given a little bit of a twist at the end of the game.
Hey Copen, I got the lab all cleaned up. Is there anything else you need me to do? Whatever you need, I got you covered.
What's gotten into you lately? You've been oddly diligent.
Yep, I recently had the slightest change of heart. Kohaku? What's up?
You really are Kohaku, right?
Aw, come on. What are you talking about? I'm totally Kohaku. I'll be here with you forever. Right, Copen?
Yeah, Kohaku is possessed by Mother at this point, and she'll say this line of dialogue every time you talk to her whenever you're selecting a stage.
We'll be together forever, Copen. We'll be together forever, Copen.
Now granted, she'll stop saying these lines the moment you pick a stage and clear a mission, but you know in the back of your mind that she is forever possessed by Mother, and that's gonna probably stay with your conscience forever. Well, unless you did what I did and stuck with Null the entire time from start to finish and not really care either way. The story for this game is not as dark as the first, and depending on who you are, you might find it to be a little bit on the hokey side due to everything I said about it earlier. Like I said, it's serviceable. I personally would have preferred that it didn't feel so out of the blue and at least gave us a clear aftermath on what's going on between the Adepts and the humans after the whole fiasco with Osmoth. But it does leave the doors open for Copen to be some kind of a dimensional warrior, even though we already have that in the form of Jason from the Blaster Master series. I don't know what Inti plans on cooking with this plotline, but we'll just have to wait and see what they'll do with it in the future. That is, should they decide to make a third installment. But for right now, let's get into that gameplay because man, there is a lot to unpack here. Right from the gate, our boy Copen is grounded. Inti decided to clip those wings and place them somewhere else, so now he's stuck with a single dash instead of having his triple bullet system like he had before, plus his pervasion is completely gone, so if you get hit, you're taking damage regardless. Granted, you are still able to dash in multiple directions, rebounding off of walls and enemies alike, but he does not regain his dash through this method anymore, and you cannot gain your dash again until you touch the ground. Additionally, Copen cannot quick drop either, so the fastest way to hit the ground after dashing is to cancel his hover. To simply put, Copen's previous gameplay loop has been tossed out of the window for a new system entirely. Instead of just I don't know, making Blade a playable character and keeping Copen's gameplay fully intact, Inti decided to slap Copen with 25% of Zero's moveset without any of the elements that made his style of play fun to begin with. For starters, Copen's blaster is replaced with a razor wheel that doubles as both being a long range and a melee weapon at the same time. This weapon in concept does sound cool, seeing as how the plasma chainsaw can fire destructo disc when locked on, or outright turn into a pizza cutter of doom at the end of its 3-step combo. Admittedly, dicing regular enemies into two this way is very satisfying, plus I do like how there is a small screen shake when Copen lands his second or third hit for that added impact. But in execution, this has got to be the most clunkiest weapon I have ever used for this gameplay style. For a weapon that is called the Quick Razor, there is nothing quick about it. At the end of each of Copen's swings, there's a significant amount of end lag that makes his weapon feel slower in comparison to the Z-Saber, plus the first hit does not flinch enemies nearly as often as it should. The damage output on this off-brand Z-Saber is lacking in compared to everything else in Copen's moveset, and using his jump attack puts you at risk of a GameStop trade since, once again, the initial hit does not cause flinching in any way. This is why attacking with the weapon feels unsafe even against regular enemies, and you're better off just using your range attacks instead. And don't even think about using the Quick Razor against the bosses. The damage output is so laughable, it's never worth taking the risk to use it against them, plus the bosses themselves will never sit still long enough for all 3 hits. Copen's grounded dash has also been replaced with a more traditional one, except now it also allows Copen to tackle things. The main reason why you would ever use it outside of grounded movement or positioning is to either shove certain obstacles out of the way, or break boulders apart like he's Chris Redfield. You can also shove enemies with it, but unless they're standing next to a cliff, all it's really doing is killing your momentum while dealing extremely minimal damage. Also, your grounded dash does not mark enemies anymore, so have fun dashing into enemies and awkwardly using your melee attacks instead of your range ones. You can restore the ability by purchasing it from the shop, but unless you plan to play hard mode, I suggest leaving it alone and getting used to not being able to mark anyone with it. Also, just like your quick razor, his tackle is useless during boss fights. You would think by turning Copen into a linebacker, he'd have more impact here, but instead it's just another function with wasted potential. Look, it would be different if your tackle did something more, like serving as a means to block or reflect projectiles and counter melee attacks with proper timing. That would at least make Copen's melee gameplay a bit more fun, and it could lead to some unique interactions or technical situations. Sadly, this is not the case. The only time I had some fun with Copen's melee is once I started to incorporate his whirling chopper into his moves, since it can cancel any of his melee attacks. So you could do something like a 2-hit combo, whirling chopper to cancel it, air dash into an enemy to get him locked on, and then razor wheel them to death. Or you can just skip all that, do your lock on into the razor wheel combo from the jump, and call it a day. By the way, his razor weapon did get a nerf by making his bullets travel slower compared to how they used to work. But despite the slowdown, it is still the superior option for all things offensive compared to everything else outside of his EX weapons. Look, I know why Inti gutted Copen's aerial kit, and I wouldn't have minded so much if they didn't replace it with such a weaker, less fluid version of Zero's gameplay. Had they just allowed Copen to still regain his air dashes after a rebound, kept his command drop, give his quick razor higher damage output, gave his melee attacks a separate button like the sub weapon system, and added more impact to his tackle in some way, I'd be a lot more forgiving about all of this. It's like Inti took their knowledge on how to make Zero style games and somehow forgotten all about it when developing this one. Well, at least he still has his devil trigger. Oh. Never mind. They decided to take that away too and relegate it to just being a screen nuke now. At this point, I have to ask if Inti even likes either of their pro tags anymore. Since I brought them up, I may as well talk about his EX weapons right now. Honestly, I have to say that they are at least decent in this game. All of them are unique from each other and even come with some additional functions, like the Rolling Ripper snatching items from places he can't bypass, much like the Boomerang Cutter from Megaman X, or how the Cairo Freeze can break the game in half if you know exactly when and where you can abuse it. But not all of Copen's weapons are winners. There are 3 weapons in the game that I hardly ever use, and that's because they were either too clunky or very situational. And those weapons in question are the Doomsday Charge, the Gatling Blitz, and the one that hurts me the most, the Anchor Nexus. The Doomsday weapon takes like 10 years to charge up in order to get any real benefit from what it can do. And if an enemy touches the fireball at all, you lose your charge and you're going to have to start all over. This is especially annoying against the bosses this weapon is strong against. The Gatling Blitz is a situational weapon, as the rest of your arsenal can make faster work of enemies without the need to use this one at all. But the Anchor Nexus, that one is directly tied to your air dashes, which you only have one of and no means of recharging them upon contact. Yep, Copen's foot dive days are done. You can purchase upgrades from the shop that will enhance certain properties in your EX arsenal, like shortening the Doomsday charge time or having the Anchor Nexus deal more damage, but once again, I'd advise you to not purchase these if you plan on playing the harder difficulty. So how do the levels fare this time around, since we're not going to be in the air as much? I will say to a certain degree, the stages are well designed with Copen's new gameplay style in mind, but only to a certain degree. The stage obstacles and enemies you'll be dealing with are all there to test your lack of fancy footwork, with the occasional need to use Copen's air dash in certain situations. Admittedly, this is all stuff we've seen in other Mega Man games, like the chasing lava sequences, slippery ice surfaces that are extra frustrating to deal with, and the whole gravity gimmick that was used in the first Ix, except now it's affecting the entire stage instead of only the second half, and this time it's littered with a number of hazards to keep you in check. In fact, it is safe to say that all of these levels, including the intro stage, are direct callbacks to multiple Mega Man games in the past. Come on, you can't tell me they didn't shamelessly remake Web Spider stage from X4 in the jungle block. They even open up with a desert setting for the intro stage in their second game, much like how it was done in Mega Man 02, the second game in that game series. Inti, you ain't slick. But to give credit where credit is due, the levels are not designed in a way where you're going to feel gimped, and aside from ice physics a stage, I didn't find any of them to be a real pain to deal with. The one stage that really stuck out to me personally was the laboratory block due to the overall visuals, the laser switch gimmicks, and the level's constant need to keep you on the move since you're going to be punished if you decide to take a breather at the wrong time. They are by no means a quick man's death laser, but they still hurt quite a lot. You could say this is the only stage that really kept Copen's kinetic gameplay intact. This is also one of the only stages in the game that has a banger of a theme too. While the songs themselves are not bad and they're still an overall improvement compared to the first two Gunvolt games, they do come off as generic and honestly, they aren't really all that memorable for that matter. Like if I sat here and asked you to hum the stage music that plays in the Arctic block, I'm 1000% sure you would have not remembered how it sounded. Don't cheat, I know you're about to look it up too. I will say this however, this game has by far the greatest boss theme out of every game in the Gunvolt lineup. Also, while I am on the subject, let me talk a bit more about those visuals I briefly brought up. This is when Inti stepped up their game and really improved the pixelized art here without doing too much to fill the screen with a lot of visual noise, unlike a certain third entry we know about. All of the levels, along with their animations between Copen, the enemies, and the bosses themselves look very polished compared to the rest of the series, and they found a nice balance between showing off that flair while still enabling you to see what you're doing at all times. Also, while I personally prefer Ix's result screen from the first game, the updated results in this game is still a nice touch, especially if you manage to get an X rank. Speaking of bosses, let's talk about them for a bit. Once again, Inti does not miss with its boss designs. I absolutely love how all of them turned out and still follow the rule of cool when it comes to their appearance, complete with their moveset to match. When it comes to fighting them though, I will say that the flow of battle is very different from the previous entries. This is likely due to the fact that 1, we don't have our usual protection known as the Pervasion this time around, we have limited dashes to work with, and the quick razor is, well, buns. But when I was fighting against the Gravekeepers, Ypsilon, and everyone else, the flow of battle felt slower compared to the other games. Sure, you still have to rely on proper positioning and knowing when to go in on the offensive, but very often when I thought it was my turn to finally go in and deal some damage, it always resulted in me trading with the boss instead. In X2, you really need to take the time to figure out when you need to play defensively and utilize your limited mobility to deal with the boss attacks while looking for the safest opportunities to mobilize and strike, especially since again we don't have our provisional or multiple dashes to bail us out this time. On one end, I can appreciate this because the bosses genuinely feel like they have a lot of bite in them, but at the same time it only seems more difficult because of Copen's gimped moveset. Of course, you can just make it a lot easier on yourself by abusing their weaknesses like before.
That burned me out.
I will say this though, I really dig the surprises Inti pulled during the rematches in the final stretches of the story. Vespa and Autochrome's rematch is a direct reference to the Beetleborgs we fought in 02, complete with the two of them ending in a similar fashion. Or when Brigade fights us without his mech first, only to put us in a Metroid situation where he activates a self-destruct sequence. By the way, that timer is still going down even after you beat him. I always love it when developers suddenly break the hidden rules you'd expect in these games, as it can make for a lot of memorable moments. The only thing that bothered me in these battles is the lack of an actual health bar for the bosses. Yes, there is one right above their head at all times so you can keep track, but not to have a static life bar at the bottom of the screen is a really odd design choice there. But issues aside, it's nice to see that Inti has consistently given us some solid boss fights in this entry. Unfortunately, everything I said about the stages and the boss fights does not mean a damn thing at all. Why do you ask? You might have noticed it, but one element I did not bring up until now is the Kudos system. I've also never revealed where Inti had hid Copen's wings, because they are still very much here. By default, your Kudos is set to gutless with no way to change the setting at all, so no matter how many times you get hit, your Kudos will never drop. When you eventually reach 1,000 of them, you will enter your overdrive state just like how it was done in the first Ix, and all of your overdrive skills will activate if you purchase any. But most importantly, Copen's bullet dash will be fully restored, and it's outright broken. Instead of getting 3 bullet charges, you have a meter that will deplete as long as you're in the air, but you can instantly refill this meter when you bounce off of walls or enemies. Thing is, as long as you have any meter remaining, you can air dash as many times as you want and basically skip the rest of the stage. Once you're in the air, you don't care. You know what? I deserve that. Even Lola agrees because she didn't even use her anthem to bail me out. This right here is why I said that the levels are designed around Copen's new gameplay to a certain degree. Because while they kept his grounded moveset in mind, they did not cover a thing when it comes to his overdrive state and when his mobility is back in full force. There's only 2 stages where I felt like I needed to be careful when I was moving around due to how they're constructed, and this is because they're littered with enough hazards that will punish you if you think you can fly around all willy-nilly. The rest, you can just throw caution to the wind and blitz through them with little to no effort. And if you think that is bad, 90% of the bosses in this game will become an absolute joke once your dashes are restored. For some reason, Copen can bounce off of the ceiling in every single boss room, even if it is not visually present. And do you remember what is refreshed every time Copen rebounds off of anything? Rather than explaining this level of maximum cheese, I'm just gonna let the footage speak for itself. In case you were wondering, I went back and attempted this same tactic in previous games. This method does not work in the older titles at all. However, keep in mind that you can only get this broken dash as long as you don't lose your Kudos. Obviously, using your screen nuke or running into a checkpoint will consume all of your points, but another thing that will also consume them is the return of Lola's healing ability from Gunvolt 2. By the way, this right here is another reason why all of the things I said regarding the levels and the bosses does not matter. When you activate Lola's heal, she'll restore Copen's health to full, but at the expense of your Kudos. Here's the thing though, unlike how it worked in Gunvolt 2 where her heal would go on a cooldown, Lola's heal has no cooldown whatsoever. You can quite literally heal yourself anytime, any place, anywhere. Don't believe me? Lola herself will tell you this with so much excitement in her voice.
Recovery sequence complete. You're getting better at using healing mode.
You bet I am. I can activate healing whenever, wherever, and however many times you need. Seriously, there's no limit to it. Don't be afraid to use it whenever you want.
Even the manuals point out that you have the equivalent of an E-tank at your disposal from the jump. I really have to ask, why did they give this to us? Who was this for? Even without the heal and dealing with the clunky moveset Copen suffers from, this game is really not that hard. So if you don't care about getting your infinite dashes or the Kudos system in general, you could just have Lola heal all your issues away at any time, effectively removing any sense of danger this game could have provided. And this is without mentioning that there is an upgrade that can reduce everyone's damage to almost nothing as long as Copen is standing still. Congratulations, Inti, you managed to give us a Mega Man based title that is far easier to play than Kirby's epic Yarn. If you must, you may pause the video to let that sink in. So let's say this mode is a snorefest and you want the game to have some bite to it. Well, if you go out of your way to collect all the golden emblems and find a hidden teleporter in a stage that's leading up to Mother, you'll unlock the game's hard mode. And it's here where the game transforms from baby's first Mega Man to Elden Ring without pause. In this mode, you're locked out of all of your abilities, you're capped at level 1 so your health pool does not get any better, Lola's healing is disabled, and since enemies do not drop health packs whatsoever, even in the normal mode by the way, your only method of healing is by touching the checkpoints. All of your EX weapons are gone and you'll have to restore them again when you defeat the bosses. The bosses themselves are not only faster, but their attack patterns are different too. The weakness system has been swapped around, plus these bosses will not flinch at all. And finally, your Kudos is set to fearless. So unless you play to perfection, you're never going to see your wings ever again. But you know what? This brutal balls to the wall mode wouldn't be so bad if it were not for one thing Inti decided to bring back at the request of no one.
Mission start!
Lives. Yes, they brought back lives. Now don't get it twisted, I'm not against having a life system. I've been dealing with lives all the way back during the 16-bit era, and a little bit into the NES era too. But most of those games back then were not trying to pull your teeth out, and in some cases, they're quite forgiving. X2 on the other hand, has made it its personal mission to cave in your skull every second it could. If you don't die by the time you get to the boss fight due to your low health pool, the boss fights are going to outright demolish your soul as they will attack you relentlessly with almost no room to make an attack of your own. And you need to relearn all of their attack patterns if you want any chance of beating them. So a lot of trial and error will happen. This wouldn't be too bad if it were not for the fact that when you lose all of your lives, you'll be booted right back at the stage select screen and you'll need to start the level all over again. And these bosses went from being reasonably challenging to the most frustrating experiences I've ever had. Now you can make this a bit more manageable by heading over to the space block and farm some extra lives over there, as it is the only stage where getting lives is relatively easy out of everywhere else, and it hands out the most in a single run. 3 in total if you have the Gatling weapon. But that is going to take a long time to do, since you need to account for how many times you're going to die to the same boss over and over and over again, then restock for the next one-sided battle you'll need to endure before you're able to fully learn what to do. It's honestly not worth going through so much trouble unless you really want to beat this mode. As a matter of fact, why would you even want to go through such great lengths to beat this mode anyway? Because this is the only way you can get the canon ending for the game. Yes, they locked an important element to the story behind a difficulty spike that is borderline unfair, all while giving you the ghouls and ghost treatment since you have to beat all of the main stages again. I can't fathom as to why they would do this other than to get the players to attempt the higher difficulties. It seems they thought it was a good idea to take a page from Kingdom Hearts book, but even those games at its hardest difficulty is far more forgiving than this. In fact, it is so unbalanced, Inti added in an assist mode that will give the player 200 lives and restore Lola's healing ability. I commend them for admitting that they dropped the ball and at least went out of their way to correct this mistake. Now, to give credit where credit is due, we did get some of the coolest boss fights in the form of the DLC packs, where X2 had a number of collaborations from other games, and all of these battles did a fantastic job reflecting all of the characters' movesets from their source material. However, there's 2 big issues I have with this DLC. One, each of the DLC packs are shamelessly expensive, with 2 of them being sold sold at $4 and the other 3 being sold at the price of $8. That is way too high if you ask me, and getting all of them at once will cost more than the actual game. To make matters worse, beating these bosses will reward you with additional abilities, like restoring Copen's bullet dash to its regular function without the need to unlock your overdrive state, or increasing the attack power of your quick razor so it becomes relevant. In other words, in order to fix 2 of the biggest issues this game has, you at least need to fork over $16. Man, you hate to see it. I really have to sit down and ask, who is this game made for? Fans of the kinetic gameplay from the previous games will have to suffer until they can get their kudos high enough in order to enjoy that style of play. Fans of the more grounded playstyle that mimics the Mega Man Zero games will quickly realize they're only playing a poor man's Zero the entire time. Then there's the fact that there is no in-between when it comes to having a casual or hardcore experience because the game leans too heavily in either direction. And this is also without addressing the occasional performance issues I've ran into when I was playing this game on the Switch undocked. Whatever you do, don't play this game undocked, especially in hard mode. That sucker will crash in the worst of times, and I am speaking from experience. It is very easy to tell that this game was rushed and Inti was under serious crunch time. They clearly didn't have the time to fine tune or polish everything due to the tight deadline they needed to meet, and this game was also under development while they were working on Gunvolt 3 at the same time. I get that this game was supposed to be the appetizer before the main course, but you still need to bring your A game despite on what it's supposed to be, and that didn't happen with this title at all. I really wanted to enjoy this game. I tried approaching it as if it was its own thing, and even tried to reapproach it as if it was a Mega Man Zero title since that was Inti's original bread and butter. But it overall felt like the game was trying to accomplish all of these gameplay styles, and it sadly missed the mark on every last one. This is why I tell everyone, if they still insist on playing this game, wait for a sale. It normally goes for $25, which isn't too much thankfully, but still, just wait for a sale. You're not missing much. Anyway, that is all I have, and as of now, I have officially covered all of the bigger Gunvolt titles. I do plan on looking at the Mighty Gunvolt series, but my Septima needs to recharge after all that, so I'm going to be switching gears to a different title. Feel free to tune in when the next video drops. Please hit that siggity sub and like the video if you dig it, and I hope I get to see y'all in the next one. And P.S. Tell Brunette CL to put some damn clothes on. You're not even at war anymore.